All right, hello and welcome back to the MARZ live stream. As you can see, we got virtual Corey here today with us. Um, and yeah, well, I think we're gonna hop back into some Blender stuff. For those of you that were watching last week, I keep having some technical difficulties with our streaming computer. So it locks up on me, and then for some reason, every time I restart it, it takes me right to the boot menu and I can't get into Windows. So it has somehow magically fixed itself, so I am back for this week. But if I randomly disappear and things freeze up, that's what happened. So sorry in advance. I've really got to get a setup where I've got two different PCs running at the same time, doing all the stuff with Unreal and Blender at the same time. And OBS, of course, running the stream is not always the smartest idea. So having two separate computers running would be ideal in this situation. But, gotta work with what I've got. So let's hop on over to Blender. And I figured we kind of do a back to basics sort of thing, covering a few of the different aspects of Blender. I started teaching a new student this week, and I realized that I don't have a lot of streams out there that just cover the real, bare necessities, so to speak. We've done a lot of the core, just hotkeys, moving things around and stuff like that. But I thought we'd talk about some of the other options when it comes to just doing basic modeling. And I've talked a little bit about sculpting and things like that. So I thought I'd go over just using modifiers specifically, and how you can utilize them for your different projects depending on what you're trying to do. So let's go ahead and switch over to our computer view here. There it is. Okay. Hopefully you're still able to hear me. Okay, it looks like everything's working. I had to do a bit of audio adjustment. I actually took the Zoom L12 out in the field yesterday and did really well, though my laptop didn't want to actually recognize it as a device for some reason, or at least recognize it as the audio source. So had some other technical issues, but otherwise the board itself worked great. It was my laptop that had issues. But anyways, here we are in Blender. I've got just a default scene set up. So over here, of course, those of you that know the UI will know that you'll find a bunch of different tabs for different things based on your scene, based on the object you have selected. It's kind of a context-sensitive panel. This is your properties panel, I believe is what the official name for it is. Yeah, properties here. So we look through here, you have all these tabs for different things, including rendering and stuff like that. So, but what we're mostly going to be looking at is these options down here that you can see change depending on based on what I have selected. So the object properties panel usually stays, but as you can see, different ones pop up. So when I select the camera, there's camera properties. When I select the light, there's light properties. And when I select an object, there are a few other ones that aren't on the other ones. Mainly the modifiers panel. And modifiers are super useful for a bunch of different things, and as the name implies, they modify stuff. So here we have our basic cube. I actually got a tablet out because I was thinking I was going to sculpt, but I changed my mind. So let's put that over there. Okay. So let's modify our basic cube here. So even just from a square, we can do, or a cube, I should say, we can do a lot of things with modifiers. So there are quite a few, and some that are used much more than others. So we're not really going to talk about any of these, the modify ones here on this leftmost column. I rarely ever use any of these. Sometimes maybe the data transfer, but other than that, really, these are very specific use cases. it's not really, you won't find yourself using them very often. So mostly I'm going to talk about is the generated and some of the physics ones and also the deform ones, because they have a much more like visual effect to your scene. So we can start from the top and let's check out the array. So as you can see, when I clicked on that, it added kind of another portion to this. This actually just added a whole nother cube. So if you change the factor, you can see they're exactly one, and it's one, I believe it's 1 unit, exactly the scale of your object. So we can test that. If I go into edit mode now and grab something, I believe that it, yep, if I move this whole side over, it like keeps it aligned with it. So it's 1 unit of your actual whatever your mesh is. So this can be super useful for a lot of different things. I typically use it for like, I don't know, if I'm making like a fence or something, you can create like the kind of like a picket fence sort of deal. You can use it for walls, obviously you can use it for stairs. You can use it for all sorts of different things. But the coolest part is that you can offset these. You can see that first one I changed was the factor of how far the second piece of the array is from the original object. So you can offset these however you need to, and then of course you can add multiple. So you can continue your array out to however far you need it. And of course, if I'm doing this in edit mode, so it will let me duplicate things, but if I duplicate this, you'll see already it's going to change how far they are because I'm actually adding more to the shape. But you can create some really neat effects with this. You can constrain some offsets, which can be useful. You can use an object as an offset. And you can also have these merge together. So if they're at a certain distance, they will merge. It's probably not going to be super obvious with this alone, but if they're close enough, and I think it's actually has to be, we may have to set this back to 0 and 0, and then if these, like where these are touching, like there on the corners, those would be merged together, those vertices. So UVs, caps, so these are, I rarely use these, but you can change the UV, so the texture that's on your whatever your model is, you can change that around if you need to. So pretty useful one. I definitely say this is a, usefulness is probably 7 out of 10 as much as I use it. So we will check out, let's move on and check on the next one since we got quite a few to cover. Next is bevel. So bevel is also very useful, but there's another way you can bevel things. This is, since this is a modifier, of course, this is non-destructive. So you can tell when I went into edit mode, you kind of see that even if I move this around, that bevel, I can't directly edit it. If I were to, real quick, I can show you. I can bevel this like manually, like this. That's Control B to bevel. And now each of these points is actually a point that I can change, which is great for some things. Other times you just want to add a bevel and not have it destroy your mesh. So of course modifiers are all non-destructive unless you apply them. So if I go in here and go to this little drop down and I have to be in object mode and hit apply and then go back in edit mode, you'll see that I'll have the same exact thing I just had when I manually did it with the shortcut. So that's the nice thing about modifiers is they're non-destructive. So I can go in here. Bevel is essentially just adding a bevel to the edges, all the edges of the object that you have. So works great on a cube. Use this on like, if you had a table or something like that, you could bevel the edges. So because like hardly ever is anything perfectly a 90-degree edge. So if you're looking to add that little like ounce of extra realism, or you're trying to get things not to totally smooth out, adding a bevel can be the solution for that. So you see there's a few different options in here. You can change you know, how much bevel is actually added to your object. You can also change the segments here. So this is actually kind of, you know, starting to make a smooth shape the more you add. You can also change some of the, you know, limit how much it can actually bevel. And as you can see what that kind of does, it only will bevel the angles that are more than, I believe it only will, once we get to like 90 degrees, it starts to bevel them. So it looks like anything over that level of degrees, it will actually bevel. So that can be super useful depending on what you're working on. And you can also, I think one of the coolest things about the bevel modifier is that you can have a custom profile for it. So let me just, real quick, I'm going to delete this cube so we have a brand new one, add back in the bevel, and show you that with the custom modifier, I can make some fancy design here. And of course it's not going to show up because it's, right now we only have one segment. So if I up the segment count to something higher, you can see that that's actually the profile I gave it. So I can pull this and change it around and make some fancy beveled edge, which is pretty neat. So if you're doing something like with crown molding or something in a house, or that's could be one way of doing it. So bevel's pretty useful. I don't actually typically use the modifier. I find myself using it more manually if I needed to change something. So using that Control B and then just scrolling up. There's a few other options in here that you can change, but we will move on to the next one. So that's the bevel. Let's go to our drop down. Now, the Boolean tool is interesting. For those of you that know, this is essentially, you know, you'll recognize this from any other application. Like, I believe that you could actually do this in Photoshop, or maybe it's Illustrator, where you can merge two shapes together. So if you have two circles next to each other, you can use the Boolean tool to essentially combine those into one shape. So this is what this is, though you can, you know, combine, subtract, and create kind of a cutout of another object. So we do need two objects for this one to actually work. So if I add in a UV sphere and take my cube that has the Boolean operator on it and select the object that I want to cut out of it. Now, of course, if I hide this, you'll see that there is kind of that hemisphere cut out of the side of the cube. So super useful. There's actually another add-on for Blender called the Bool tool. If you need something a little bit more robust, there is the Bool tool. And the Bool tool is essentially the same thing, but gives you a few more options that the normal modifier doesn't. And I find that it tends to work a little bit better. So once you've activated it, I believe it is underneath something. I guess we can look. You will find it. So here's one handy tip about add-ons. It will tell you exactly the location. So 3D view, edit, tab. Yeah, I'm in the right place. Do we have to have, oh, we have to have a object selected. So let's real quick, we can get rid of that Boolean and then go to edit and the Bool tool. And now I hid that sphere. So if I click on this, click on that, and do, let's say, let's take the intersection of that. So now if I click that button, it automatically, like without having to add any modifiers or anything, I get that little cutout of, that's the point where the cube and the sphere were intersecting each other. So this can be super useful, especially with like doing what's called hard surface modeling. So if you're doing, you know, something you need some really sharp, exact edges, you can use these type of tools to do that. So of course, these aren't the best kind of unwrapped objects per se. So I wouldn't really use this with something you were going to try to like animate like a character or something, unless they were, I guess, a robot. But like I said, like hard surfaces, anything that's manufactured, stuff like that, the bool tool is awesome for. So I know I didn't really show you the modifier. There's not many settings in there. So I would use this add-on additionally. So it can be super useful depending on what you're doing. So you can do quite a bit with it. So say I want to just like do the, whoops, I want to do, let's do slice. Oh, so it depends on what order you select them. So if I select that first, and, oh, interesting. It just sliced right through and gave me two pieces. So as you can see, now I have, you know, normally this would take forever to try to model yourself. So this kind of does it automatically. You do end up with these weird like pieces. Of course, the geometry in there is not great either, but if that's all you need and you don't have to like animate this or modify it in any way, then you'd be set. So let's get in a new cube here and move on to the next one. So what else we got? We got build. So build is interesting, and I don't really use this one. So some of these, I think you need multiple pieces for this. Oh no, there we go. I don't use this one very often, but the cool thing with this one is that you can animate this. So essentially what it's doing is just adding in the faces and the lines and the vertices and like building this object. So from 0 to 1, you can kind of see this will build that shape back together. So really mostly only useful for doing like visualizations of your 3D model, I guess. I don't know. Somebody probably has some creative way to use it. I don't really know what it is. You definitely can animate this value and have it build up a mesh, and it would look pretty cool. But practically, I don't really use it for modeling anything because there's not a whole lot of use cases. But that's build if you want to use that. Next is the decimate. So this one is useful. I use this one quite a bit, and it's going to be kind of hard to see on. Actually, let's do Suzanne here. Actually, we're going to sneakily jump ahead and subdivide this real quick. We'll look at that later. Shade smooth. Just to show you what decimate does, I've got a little bit more complicated mesh here. So as you can see, there's more polygons. Let's go into modify and add the decimate. So what this can do is can simplify a mesh. So say I've used this on like if you have a photo scan or something, like a 3D photo scan, you can use decimate if you need like a quick and dirty way to like really reduce your poly count. So if I take this ratio and bring it down, you're gonna see, I don't know how well that comes across on stream, but as I go down, it's actually lowering the resolution quite a bit. As I keep taking it down, you'll see it is pretty much reduced to unrecognizable shape. But can turn on symmetry, so at least it keeps somewhat more of its shape. But essentially this just simplifies your geometry. But it doesn't do it super well. There are some other options up here. You can unsubdivide, which is usually a better option if you have a mesh that was like made properly. So I can actually kind of undo my my adding of the subdivision surface, but I can keep taking this down and down and down and down as far as it will go, really. And then if I look at this, I don't know if it's going to show me in edit mode. No, I have to apply it. So if I go and apply this and go into edit mode, you'll see how much fewer vertices there are. The only problem with these is it creates these triangles. Some of them are quads, but triangles are typically something you want to avoid. They're okay in some cases, but definitely for something like this, like a face, if you were going to animate this, you wouldn't want them. You want this kind of clean these face loops going around all the quads and stuff. So probably doing subdivision like once, twice might be okay. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, see, that's still okay. There's some areas that we could actually just manually fix, but other than that, it's not bad. You could get away with using that. So, and then that last option is planar, and I don't use this one very often. I'm sure you could get some pretty good results out of it if you knew what you were doing with it. But you can kind of see here, the nice thing is you can see this face count as I bring things down. The face count gets lower and lower. So that's what you do. If you had something like, you know, I don't know, 50,000 faces, you could go in and decimate it if you wanted to. So can be useful. Let's see. Next is the edge split, and I rarely ever use this, but you can, I believe what this does is actually splits all of the faces away from each other. So all of these, all the faces here, if I go in edit mode now, after I apply that, this should be a separate piece, yeah. So personally, I don't know what the, I mean, you can do cool stuff like that. I don't know what the use case is for this, but you know, you could do something neat like this and make a cool, like, I don't know, that makes a kind of a neat piece. Super simple. It just essentially just cuts all of the individual faces out of the mesh. And as you can see, I could like choose the degree at which it picks what edges to cut. So if I brought this back up and then went into, then applied this, it's not going to be all of the faces. So I'm just Alt S, whoops, not Alt S. Not that either. Alt S, there we go. Which is scaling on the normals. But as you can see, it didn't like cut all the faces, just the ones that were over that level of degrees. So pretty interesting. I wouldn't say it's the most useful, but it is useful if you have a use for it. So next is the geometry nodes, which we're not really going to talk about because I honestly have not had a chance to really dive too deep into geometry nodes, but essentially what they are is a way to procedurally generate a mesh using nodes, of course. Very similar to how you make materials in Blender, but much more complicated. So we're not going to get into that, so I'm just going to delete that one and move on to the next one. Next is mask. So mask, honestly, I don't use this one either, and I'm not entirely sure what it does. So let's find out real quick. I think that if I have it looks like if I have a vertex group, so this is where you can essentially just assign vertices to a group, which I just did. Same way you weight paint bones to your mesh. So if you like want to assign the forearm to the forearm of your skeleton, to your armature, you can assign, you have to assign the vertex group and then assign which vertices should be attached to that bone. So, but once we do that and pick this vertex group, oh, okay, yeah, so it does exactly what I think it does. Since they're assigned to that group, they show up. So you can have other, like, you can hide pieces of the mesh from render, I'm assuming. Not totally sure what that's useful for, but somebody out there probably uses it for something. I'm not entirely sure. You can do it, you can use an armature with it instead of a vertex group if you wanted to, but I'm not sure what that one seems even more useless to me than the edge split, but there it is. So the next one is the mirror modifier. So let's do something real quick. And this is definitely a 10 out of 10 for usefulness. It is probably my most used modifier, and I'm sure most Blender users, it is also their most used modifier. What am I trying to do? I want to see through. So I'm just going to delete half of Suzanne here. Make sure all of it's deleted. All of it. I've got some really small pieces to the nose. There we go. Okay. And then go into my modifiers. So, of course, now I have a half. Just switch this back to solid. And then in modifiers mirror, does exactly what you think it would do. Creates a mirror image. So now if I go into modify Suzanne, maybe give her pointy ears or something, then it happens on both sides. Simple as that. I mean, symmetry is your best friend when creating any kind of 3D model, whether it's, you know, a face like this, or a table, or a starship, or whatever. There's tons of things that are symmetrical. This is probably the most handy modifier out of the whole bunch of them. Cool thing with this too is that not only can you mirror on one axis, you can mirror on multiple axes at the same time. So if I take this and move it away, you can see it's also mirroring across the y-axis of the model. So it depends on where the origin point of your mesh is. That's something that's really important to consider, is that wherever this little orange dot is where your mirror plane is going to be. So it's, you know, if I rotate this and everything, it stays the same because it's mirroring based on the local axes of the object. So in this case, it's the same as the world axes. So as you can see, the red line here and the green line here correspond to the y and the x axes. So because it's at its default position, we're seeing it that way. So just something to keep in mind, that if your mirror modifier is not working right, check your object and see if it's rotated at all, because that will affect the axes that is mirrored across. So, of course, you know, you can mirror on the Z as well. So I definitely use this. I use sometimes I will use multiple axes if I'm creating, definitely like the X and Y if you're making anything like a table, because you can just do the 4 corners of the table and then mirror it down. You can use it for things like swords, because they are symmetrical. If you cut them in half one way and cut them in half the other way, most of the time they're symmetrical on both those axes. Things like, you know, a pen or something like this is definitely symmetrical on the 2 axes. So if I cut it in half and then I cut it in half the other way, it's not completely symmetrical because it has this kind of divot in it. So it would only be symmetrical on one end. But, you know, a pencil or something that doesn't have like a clip on it or whatever is definitely symmetrical. So there are a lot of things that it's going to be used for. You can also set a manual mirror object. I rarely do that. The only thing I actually do use quite a bit is the clipping tool. So what this does is essentially when you get this close enough to the mirroring point, you can kind of see it there. It's actually merging those vertices and holding on to them. So if I push this together, it's going to start kind of collapsing Suzanne into this weird Cyclops thing. And that becomes as a flat plane. The problem with this now is even though I try to pull this, it's not going to come apart. So you really got to be conscious of what you're bringing toward the center. I see this a lot with students, like accidentally bringing things too close to the mirroring point, and then they get stuck together, and then you end up with like either overlapping vertices or these mirrored vertices that are just kind of smashed in the center. And you definitely don't want that. So you just got to be careful with it. But it's useful because it keeps you from pulling apart your mesh. And you can also do things like, let me just turn these 2 off. You can also do things like if you want to create like a spot for, I know this is not where the mouth goes, but you can, when you merge these, it acts like a kind of a holding point. So you can create, it sort of keeps those things clipped together instead of, like if I turn clipping off and try to do the same thing, you'll see the difference. So now if I clip, it merges but doesn't hold on to those vertices. So, and plus the seam. So if I wanted to move this over, here's clipping, pull that out, and it doesn't pull apart. So super useful. Definitely something. The mirror tool is probably one of the first modifiers I show students when they're working in Blender. So definitely a 10 out of 10 for usefulness. So let us apply the mirror modifier. That way we can go back to applying modifiers to poor Suzanne here. Put this back. I can actually just do object and clear the transforms location. There you go. Next is the multi-resolution. Now this is for sculpting typically. What you can do with this is add levels of detail. So it's kind of like the subdivision surface, but instead mostly used for doing like high resolution sculpts and then baking those. You can bake those details into a lower resolution mesh. I haven't really gotten the habit of using this yet. I don't do a lot of really high detailed sculpting, but that's what it's for. So if I subdivide this, you can see, I need to smooth, there we go, that actually smoothed it out a little bit. So if I go before and after, you can see it's smoothed out and I can keep going. So you got to be really careful with these though. Same with the subdivision surface, which we'll look at here in a minute. Because the more you add, the more you subdivide, the higher risk you have of crashing Blender and the slower performance you'll get. So I have seen students just add a bunch of subdivisions and it just instantly freezes and Blender crashes and yeah, you got to start over. So definitely be aware of that. Watch out for those subdivisions. This one is useful for sculpting, but not really for what we're doing. Just doing the regular modeling like this. So we're gonna move on to the next one, and that's remesh, which is pretty fun. I like the remesh tool. Honestly, if I were taking a model and trying to rebuild it, I would use this over the decimate, because with this, you have a few more options of how you want to rebuild your mesh. So as you can see already, it's kind of taken Suzanne and destroyed what we had. So, but we can change this voxel size. Of course, the higher the voxel, the less detail you'll have, but the lower, the more detail you have. So I can bring this down and sort of create a whole new mesh. So I get to a point where this tool is the same. It's the same way that in sculpting, when you remesh a object, this is what it uses. And this actually, if I apply this, is not like, it's not the best, but also not the worst when it comes to geometry. So if I undo real quick, the neat thing with this though, and probably one of my favorites, is the block remesh. So for those of you who like that sort of voxel style, this is awesome because you can essentially just create the voxel art, the voxel 3D voxel characters. Let me make this a little easier to see. Let's turn on this. There we go. Maybe that helped a little bit, or not. Do my cap. There we go. That's a little bit better. Like the sun. These are just some objects up here that you can change to. No, it doesn't want to give me the. I just need to rotate this a little bit. It's a little bit better. As you can see, you can create these sort of voxel style things, which is really cool. Super easy to add in. You can also do these weird smooth and sharp, and then the voxel one. So you kind of pick what you like and use that. So remesher is pretty simple. It's fun to play around with. You can also easily crash your computer with this one, so watch out for how much, like how many blocks you add, because the more, the more detail, obviously, the more computing power you use. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's go on to the next thing. So, making our way through. Now, the screw modifier is also very useful, and this is weird looking, but not in the case that we're using it right now. So let me actually delete our weird Suzanne there and start us off with let's go with a cube. And I'll show you, if I go into edit mode, there's sort of a special use case, but I definitely feel like the screw modifier is very useful in a lot of cases. So actually, I don't know what I'm doing. There we go. I'm just going to merge this at center. This is actually one of the projects that I start with students. And I'm going to draw just like the silhouette of, let's do a vase. Well, let's do a bowl. I'll just do a deep bowl here. So I'm going to do think of using the screw modifier like you're making pottery. So I'm going to make like just the silhouette, a half of the silhouette of a bowl here. And then I'm going to go in to the modifiers, add the screw modifier, and then as you can see, like magic, I have myself a bowl. So this is also a super useful modifier for creating things that are symmetrical and fully like all the way around, same like a pen kind of thing, or a lamp post, or a table leg, or something like that. You know, this is a super quick way to to create an object. So you know, if you think of anything that's made like with pottery, like on a pottery wheel, or possibly even with like what do they call those? They're like it's like the wood carving tool. You like put it in the thing and it spins, and you take the knives and you like carve out the pieces of it. I can't remember. It's like a it's not a wood dowel, is it? Something like that. A dowel is the, anyways, you know, stuff like that. That's all essentially what this is doing. You can do a few other things with this. You can create like slides or something like that, and because you can change you can actually change the screw amount. So there you go, there's a slide. Same kind of idea. Of course, you can make this more like curved and whatever you need to do, but can be a pretty useful one. You can actually use it to create stairs too. There's a lot of different things you can do. So like you can up the iterations so that you can sort of make this curly thing. Now it's like a drill bit almost. So there's a lot you could do with this modifier. It's definitely, with so few settings, you can create a lot of different things. Definitely recommend playing with it and trying it out, because it's a pretty useful one. So I definitely rank it up there. Probably not as high as the mirror modifier, of course. If that's like top tier, I'd say the screw modifier is probably, I don't know. Let's see, what did we put? We put array modifier at 7, so it's kind of in the same realm as the array modifier. So let's keep it there, about 7 probably. So you can get rid of that. Actually, I'm going to apply this so we have this funky looking object to mess with. Next is actually, well, I'm going to have to delete it because we're going to use the skin modifier. So the skin modifier is also one that I use in my classes to teach with, because it's a quick way to create, I've used it actually on stream quite a bit too when we were doing our character creation tutorial things. What this does is makes I'm gonna merge these all together, and just like make a funny shape here, like kind of like a tree thing, maybe like this. Of course, you can make characters with this in combination, but with just this, I'll do a tree. So with the screw modifier, if I add this on, well, not the screw modifier, the skin modifier, there we go. As you can see, it takes those single lines and just adds volume around those lines. So it can be pretty useful for things. And as you can see, it's non-destructive. So I can just, all I have is these vertices here. And so I can create whatever I want with this. You can also scale these. So Control A, which is really weird. I don't know why that is. I think it's that's specific for scaling these vertices. But with that, you can kind of scale up different pieces. So Control A, and I can make like the base of the tree here or something. You go crazy with it and make the roots and everything. But it's a super quick way to make these sort of cool organic shapes. We use it in class to actually create characters. So we do like a stick figure, and then use the skin modifier to create just like the body of the character. So with this, you can actually, one of the really cool things is you can create an armature from this. You can also, I usually like to add this with the subsurface so that it smooths it out. Getting a little bit weird here. Make sure, there we go. You have to be a little careful because it can kind of create some interesting issues with the mesh if you're not watching it. But let's just do that. I usually combine this with the subdivision. We haven't got there yet, but so I won't show it. But you can use this to create a armature, and essentially now I just can go into pose mode, and everything's already like weighted properly and like has the proper parenting. So like this is a, you know, if you wanted to animate this tree really quick, like have a character, I don't know, pull on the branch or something, super quick to just have a armature set up. Super quick, because this would take forever to do manually. But you know, you want the whole tree to sway back and forth, you can do that. So definitely a useful one. I'd say it's probably even more useful than the screw modifier, because there's a lot you can do with it, especially this feature with the armature. I think that's super useful. So definitely maybe an 8 out of 10 usefulness. So, and you can see it even applied to armature. So this is one we haven't looked at yet, but we will. But let's undo that and undo, Control Z, take it back. Cool. Okay. So what do we got next? Oh, solidify. Okay. So solidify, let's keep our tree real quick just so we can use that later. And we'll look at subdivision, but let's look at, I'm just going to add a plane here because the next one is solidify. So with this solidify modifier, that was weird. Is a plane like reflective or something? I can't see it at certain angles. Huh. Anyways, I don't know why that is. It's just the lighting in here. Oh, it's, yeah, I just had the X-ray on. No wonder. So with solidify, what you can do, and I do use this one quite often, is solidify things. So I have this flat plane, right? If I wanted to say this was a shirt or something, and like everything has some thickness to it, because this is, I mean, this plane is like microns thin. It really has no thickness to it whatsoever. So if you caught this from the side, like say, this was the side of your character's like shirt or something, you wouldn't be able to see it. It wouldn't render because there's really nothing, like I can't really line the camera up well enough, but there is no thickness to this plane at all. It was just a flat plane, and there's no even level of like atomic thinness that it is like. So nothing in the real world is that thin. So what the solidify does is pretty simple. It adds a slight amount of thickness to any mesh. So it's particularly useful for things like I said, clothes, or if you want something to look more realistic, like actual fabric, adding a solidify helps a lot. And you can do this like post physics if you wanted to, so that it's not calculating this, because as we'll talk about it in a minute, but these modifiers, of course, you can add more than one, and depending on, and I've mentioned this before in previous tutorials, depending on the order in which they're at, that's when that's how it affects the mesh. So that's why the physics are in here, but they also have their own category, because you need to tell Blender, like, okay, what order do you want me to do this thing? Do you want me to apply the physics first and then add the solidify? That's typically what you want to do. So, but anyways, with this, we have a few different things. Of course, we can change the thickness of it. You can set an offset, which is essentially just moving it to one side or the other. You can have the rims fill, which typically you want it to. You can actually make it only the rims, which is interesting. And then even thickness, which can be useful. And there's a whole bunch of different settings in here for the materials, some things for like creasing the edges, other options for different things. But typically I just turn it on and let it go. There's a complex mode too, but I don't ever find myself needing this. I'm not exactly sure what settings it gives you. I think you can just assign it to just one vertex group. So if you only want a certain area of the cloth to be like have thickness, like if it was just like the edges of the shirt and stuff like that, you can assign just the vertex group. It looks like that's what you'd be used, but typically I just assign it to the whole thing. You wouldn't want to use this if you were trying to export to like a game engine. You would probably want to do it manually because it can. I mean, it's essentially just doubling your vertex count. So you do have to be kind of careful with it. I wouldn't use it if you're gonna like put a character in a game or something. You know, I would do that thing where it's like just the edge, like maybe a vertice back or something, and then instead of doing it to the whole like shirt mesh or whatever, because then it will be a bunch of things that you don't see, like you won't see on the character, and it's just extra. So, but anyways, that's the solidify. Very useful, pretty simple. Definitely sits in that solid 7 category. So next is probably the other 10, or maybe a 9, probably 10, is the subdivision. So as you can tell, even like trying to demo some of this stuff, I've added it. So probably it's a 10. May actually be the top 10, even over the mirror modifier, because there are some cases that I use the subdivision more. So maybe the mirror modifier is a 9 and the subdivision is a 10. It'd be funny, a tier list of Blender modifiers. Maybe I'll have to do that sometime. Very nerdy thing to tier list, but I'm sure there's been nerdier. Nerdier, is that a word? Anyways, let's look at the subdivision. So it's pretty simple. As you see, I was turning it on and off. It is, whoops, there it goes. Taking the mesh, subdividing it, and then smoothing it. So you can subdivide without smoothing things, of course. That's just taking one of the, if you see like one of these squares, like this one, for example, if you took the square and cut it in half, both ways, that's a subdivision. You've essentially made one square into 4, and you can do that a bunch of times. So that's why we use squares, is because they can be subdivided. Triangles can't really be subdivided very easily. They can, but I guess they can be subdivided into 3, but typically do it with quads, because then you can unsubdivide, and it's just easier that way. So if I turn this on, you can see it added 4 there, and it sort of smoothed it out. Of course, you can still see these because I'm shading it smooth, or I'm shading. Oh, I have to go into this. I think, yeah, there we go. Just so you can see it, I'll keep it off. But if I bring this viewport level up, you see it added, subdivided again, and smoothed it out again. If I do it again, it's going to keep smoothing it and smooth it more and more. So super useful. It's really pretty much everything that you make is probably going to have this subdivision on it, unless you're going for that low poly look. The great thing with this is that, like I said, it's non-destructive. So, I mean, in this case, if we want to change our skin modifier around a little bit, I don't want that, I want this. You know, it's applied after this. So here's a good example of like what will change. So if you watch this and I flip this around, you can see that this is like curved now because it's actually subdividing. It's subdividing, you won't be able to see, but it's subdividing the lines here instead. So all these branches are going to be all curly, but the mesh itself is not going to be smooth. I mean, it's sort of smooth because it's taking the original lines and adding volume to them, but you can kind of see the difference between putting it there and putting it there. So the order does matter, something to take into consideration. So yeah, what is it talking about? CPU and GPU subdivision. I haven't seen that before. But we'll leave that at 1. And let's see what's next. So that's a subdivide. Definitely a solid 10, probably of usefulness. Definitely one that I use almost all the time. Next is triangulate. So pretty straightforward. Excuse me. Let's just apply these. And when you apply these, you want to do it in order. And we can look at the mesh here, and you can see that we have a bunch of quads, which is good. Oops, what did I do? There we go. I wanted to do that. There. We have some, oh yeah, these are all quads. That's a nice thing about the skin modifier too, is that it actually makes quads. I think it's one of the few modifiers that like really actually tries to keep quads in its, like when it generates the meshes, which is super cool. But with this, if we needed to triangulate, which I'm not sure why you'd want to, but there's an option for it. And as you can see, it's triangulated. I don't really ever use this, but I can apply it and look in here, and now it's triangulated. I know some like game engines will triangulate meshes automatically. I don't know if it has something to do with like how things render. I believe that's probably why. So most of the time, if you're moving things to a game engine, it's going to do it automatically, and you don't really have to manually do it. Honestly, once you've done this, it's very hard to work with if you're trying to add more to it. So I recommend maybe avoiding that one unless you have to use it for something, which I'm not sure what exactly you'd use it for unless it was just for stylistic choice. But that is the triangulate. And then we have a few more down here. The volume to mesh is interesting. This is not really going to work, and I don't really want, it's going to take a little bit to set up to display it. Essentially, actually we're running fairly low on time. So we'll just run through these real quick. I don't really use weld hardly ever. I don't know what that really does. You can click on it and see. Doesn't have very many settings. So maybe you can take a vertex group and like combine them somehow. And then wireframe is actually pretty cool. This one's useful for like doing some cool visualization stuff. As you can see, it just like gave the wireframe like a instead of displaying like the mesh, it just shows the wireframe, which gives it that like, it looks like wires. It looks like a metal wire sculpture kind of deal. You can also, there's some settings I thought in here to keep the, no, maybe not. I thought there was a way you could keep the underneath part, but I don't see that option. You can change the thickness. You could like duplicate this, put it back, then delete that, and then you can keep the outside. I thought there was a way to do it. Maybe I'm just missing it, but kind of a neat effect. It's like the Spider-Man costume. Looks like it's all embroidered. So, which it is. You can zoom right in and see it. So, you can get some cool stuff out of that. So that's all of our generated ones. Next are the deform modifiers. We kind of saw the armature one earlier. That's essentially just like attaching bones to things, characters, trees, grass, whatever it is. You're just telling it, hey, these bones change the way this thing looks. Pretty straightforward. I may do another video where I go through all these, since this took us an hour to go through all these anyways. But we might as well talk about them a little bit. There are definitely some I don't ever use. Cast, I'm not exactly sure what that does, but it's interesting. Let's hide that. Oh, whoops. There we go. That is definitely interesting. Like I said, some of these I don't know what they do. Okay. Cool. Not sure what you'd use it for, but definitely might have some use case. Curve is also one I don't hardly ever use. I think you can take curves which are here. I don't know what this will do, but you can attach a curve to it. It looks like, yeah, and it just follows the curve. That could be useful for sure. If I go in and edit this, I bet it will follow it. Yep. So not exactly an effect that oh, okay. Sure. So you could probably attach, you attach something to the curve and modify it in some way. Let's see what else we got before I have to go. Displace. I have used this before. This is kind of an interesting one because normally I use it with like terrain. So you can use like a displacement texture, which is essentially just like a depth texture. They're usually just black and white. They have, it tells Blender which is like what's higher than another thing. And you can create terrain with it if you plug it in a terrain map. And it just displaces, you see you can use a texture, so we can add like a new something. Go into textures here, change it to clouds, and you can come up with some cool, you can like change the size of it. It's kind of hard to tell when it's not. If we like took this and subdivided it, let's smooth this out. It's going to be kind of intense here. Turn the strength down, but you can kind of add that texture to it. So definitely a useful one. I don't use it a whole lot, but it's something I have used in the past, and would recommend trying it out if you're trying to create, terrain or something like that, or just add some extra procedural texture to the surface of your objects. So actually for this tree, like making it kind of look like bark, is nice. So I'm gonna run out of time, but there are a few more in here that I do use, like the smoothing. Essentially, that's just like smoothing a mesh without adding extra subdivisions, like we were talking about. Wave is a cool one. This one's actually one that Corey really likes. You just make the thing kind of wave around. So perfect for like music videos and things, if you're doing that. Warp, you can warp to objects. Shrink wrap is also another one that's really cool. I'll have to demo some more of these. I think because we'll get into the physics and then talk about more of the deform ones. Also using like lattices is neat too. It's like, deforming a mesh with another object. So there's a lot more to look at, but that was basically all of the generated or the generate column of modifiers. So super powerful. Definitely recommend utilizing modifiers where you can. They will save you a lot of time, and they, have there's a lot of features in there to dig through. So, yeah, have fun with it. And if you have any questions, remember you can always reach out to us at the MARZ project, whether by email or Instagram or YouTube or whatever it might be. And yeah, we're here to help. So let us know, and we will catch you next time.